Hello, everybody, and good day to you. It's noon over here in Brussels or Antwerp, Belgium. Thank you for joining this webinar, webinar on supply chain disruptions and how from a resilience perspective we can organize ourselves. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here with a few of my colleagues. I will introduce the agenda and my colleagues to you in a minute. Maybe a few practical arrangements before we start. There is a Q&A in the Zoom webinar. I'm sure that you will find the right button to do that. So if you have a question, you can address it there. And at the end of the session, as you'll see, we will be able to spend a few moments to address those questions that you may have. There will be a recording made, so I hope everybody is aware of that. You can access the recording after the webinar if you would be interested, after you have completed a survey on how the webinar went according to your feelings at the end of it. So please, if you would like to have the recording, the slides that go with it, just let us know and fill in the survey, and then we will be able to provide all of the details to you. Voila, that's it. Thank you for attending, and I propose that we get started first by looking at the agenda maybe. Right, we'll do some quick introduction so that you know who we are as people are dialing into the call. After that, we'll just spend a few moments on what actually are disruptions, where do they come from, where do we see them originate, what is resilience exactly? We hear the term so much, but what does it actually mean? We're relying on our good friends of APIX, Association for Supply Chain Management, of course, when it comes to standards and terms and definitions. So that's also what we will use as a framework for today's info sharing webinar. After that, we'll share some of the results of a survey that we did on supply chain disruptions. We all know, I'm quite sure that all, if not most, if not all of you are into supply chains on a daily basis. So I'm quite sure that you know what disruptions could be. Well, we have done a survey on it. We have done some research on it. So we'll also share the results of that with you. That will take us about, something like 10 minutes, opening up the floor as that fourth topic that you see there for my colleagues who will share our integral resilience approach, right? It takes an approach, it takes an integral view on things to work on supply chain resilience. And we will be happy to share a lot of practical insights there. And then, as I said, at the end of today's session, we will, of course, open up the floor for your questions, address the questions that you have at the end of today's session. That should take us about 30 minutes of presentation time, leaving 5 to 10 minutes at the end of today's call for some questions. Good. That being said, I propose that we first do some quick introductions. My colleagues Bob and Wouter, whom you'll see on the or in the Zoom tool, have been involved in supply chain consulting for a little bit of time. Bob, who is a manager in our team, has a focus on business supply chain processes and supply chain systems integrations. Think about planning solutions with mainly within pharma, but also international logistics and even an energy distribution company. Wouter, who will join us also today, is an expert in supply chain management in general, but with a focus on digital transformations and procurement. So he'll be also a good person to walk us through some of the detailed elements. Myself, I'm heading the supply chain group over here in Belgium. I have a background in ERP and operations management. Well, that's who you will hear in the next 30 minutes. Maybe introducing who we are as a company and more as a global company. The people who are working you through these slides today are all based in Belgium and working out of our more Belgian branch, who today employs a little over 1,000 employees. We have offices pretty much across the country, And we're doing many things next to supply chain management. As you can see, we're also doing a lot of other services. Happy to share that we are a partner of ASCM. Those in supply chain management, I'm quite sure it will resonate, it will ring a bell. ASCM, the Association for Supply Chain Management. READ, the institute, the umbrella firm above the standards of SCORE, Supply Chain and Operations Reference Model, and APIX, right? The best practices and benchmarks for supply chain management. So those are our partners, and we are using actually a part of their ways of working, their resilience approach. We have embedded it into our methodology approach to becoming more resilient. And my colleagues Bob and Wouter will walk you through the details of that in the second half of today's session. So, disruptions. We've gone through some very challenging times. It's always been a little bit of a challenge being in supply chain. There's always something that needs taken care of. But to say the least, the last 3 years have been very challenging, right? There's been the pandemic, which, as we know, led to a stop and go and a bullwhip that went with that. You know, we still feel the ramifications of today. There still are those trickle-through effects in some of the logistic lanes. Think about still the issues, the capacity issues, and the imbalances that you might have heard of still today in the international, in the global containerized logistics. But there's also been geopolitics, the Brexit, which led many companies to revisit their network. What operations are we doing, maybe in the UK? You know, how do we get our products onto that market? How do we make sure that we don't lose market share? And how do we make sure that we keep those logistical flows up and running? Then the famous Suezkanal incident. I'm sure that does not need a lot more explanation, but it just added onto the imbalance that we already saw. Continue with, unfortunately, still today, typically mainline topic or headline topic in many news bulletins, Ukraine and Russia situation, which impacted a number of raw materials, and especially in the food sector. There still is a big impact in terms of keeping and getting access to those raw materials, those commodities. But also the impact to the energy cost, leading a number of manufacturing companies into difficult waters. How do we just survive, knowing that the energy cost has gone up so much? And then, of course, we all hear about balloons flying across continents today. The tensions between the West and China, I think, are also adding on to the uncertainty that we all feel. And, you know, uncertainty in a globalized economy, in a global logistical world is, of course, not what you want at all. So those are some of the factors that led to disruptions in the supply chain. There's been global, there's been geopolitics, there's been a number of natural events. All of these are actually disturbances in a process, in a manufacturing or distribution process, which actually have consequences and leads to disturbance. Now, resilience, if you look at the official APIX definition, you see that resilience is actually the ability of a supply chain to anticipate, avoid, mitigate, or recover from those disruptions, right? What does it take for a company to just be prepared, and if something happens, recover, both on an operational, maybe shorter term level, as well as on a strategic level, right? Now we'll look into those two dimensions later on, as I said, as we walk through the methodology. Now, if something happens, and maybe we can go back a few moments to the previous slide. If something happens, the question that we ask ourselves is, if you look at those three charts, if something happens, how much time does it take for us to get back on track, right? And if something happens, how deep do we go in terms of by how much are our operational processes, our operational capabilities hit by the event that happened. And those can be translated into basically three groups. What is the time it takes that we can buffer, the time it takes to get back on track or to start improving again. That's what we call dampen time. How much time does it take to recover back to normal, which is the recovery time? And those can be measured, right? And the fact that they can be measured is, of course, a key input to our methodology, as you will see later on. Now, companies who are operating below the average, below the standard in their peer group, in their market, in their sector, they might not even get back up to the same performance. Maybe they might lose some market share even because of that. And of course, it's the same in the other direction. If you are well prepared, if you have proactively thought through, how to become more resilient, maybe you can recover more quickly, and maybe you need less buffers because you are just more agile and more adjustable to get back on track. And then, of course, you can gain compared to your peers. That's pretty much the philosophy of resilience, right? Now, how to do it, that's what we will see later on. Before jumping into the approach, I will first look at the survey that we held. We wanted to really understand in the market, in your industry, in your sector, and we asked quite some different sectors, what did you see? How are you feeling the disruptions? And secondly, what mitigating actions are you taking? That's pretty much the core of the survey that we organized on the disruptions. So let's walk through some of the results. We asked over 100 companies within various functions, but typically at the managerial executive level. And we asked them, what in your experience are, the disruptions that you felt and what is driving it? What are the key categories of disrupting factors that have hit you? And what are you doing against it? What are you doing to protect yourself from the consequences of those disruptions? Those were the basic two categories of questions. So we identified 4 key risks, key disrupting factors, risks, you could call it. There were more identified, but these were the 4 top ones that came back coming out of the survey that we asked into the market. First one is geopolitics. Now, geopolitics can be, we've seen many examples, but can have a direct or an indirect impact. Think about some of the raw materials that you get from a certain area. If there is a political society instability, that can have a direct impact. Your products may no longer be available or they may come delayed, right? But maybe even bigger, but more hidden is the indirect, the level of deteriorating trust in that logistical setup, in that source of supply, you could even say. That, of course, also may lead to uncertainty and to overall distrust in the system that we have all organized at the past decades to get our products and our raw materials into our own hands. 93% of the respondents answered that they see geopolitics as a key driver of risk. Second risk, cyber. The number is not as high, but still is very high. We've all heard of many examples, even of our own cities, who sometimes got into the spotlight, who were attacked by criminals, cyber criminals. We're also hearing it with companies who are manufacturing or companies who are relying on maybe logistical service providers, 3PLs whose systems got hit by cyber attacks. So also here you may have a direct impact. Your own IT infrastructure gets impacted, leading to disruptions in your own operations. Or maybe one of your suppliers or one of your logistical service providers has been hit, and that then also can have an impact, of course. 70% of those questions identified this as a key risk. Risk number 3, natural disasters. We all know the examples, some of the past, some of the recent days, actually. Think about the earthquake in Turkey and Syria. If you have operations in Turkey, maybe your site might be unavailable, or there might be a resource problem overall. But also think about snowstorms. We've seen some heavy ones in North America this past winter. But there's a lot that can happen in terms of natural disasters that can directly impact our logistical setup. So 35% indicated that they really saw that as a driver of risk and distortion. Risk number 4, logistical imbalances. With all of the disruptions that we have seen, we also see that there is shifts happening actually as we speak into how are we organizing our supply chain. Are we maybe reshoring certain activities? Are we maybe buffering more inventory just as protection to protect ourselves from disruptions? Well, what we see, of course, if companies massively start to increase their inventory, moving away from just in time as a concept, but then they need, of course, more logistical capacity. And we all know that that is not there infinitely. And so also here we see a major risk that companies feel. Because of the imbalances, a number of capacity issues in transportation and warehousing capacity have been identified. 92% of companies identified that as a serious risk that they see. Now, those are the risks. Second type of questions that we asked is, how do you protect yourself from those risks? One, and that is a clear one, is strategic stock build-up. Companies have decided to move away, at least to some extent, from the just-in-time and lean philosophy, lean in terms of inventory. So they're now switching back to extra stock build-up. Some even, and we got the answer from various sectors actually, from food, but also from electronics. Some are revisiting their portfolio, maybe deciding to temporarily or less temporarily remove certain items from their product portfolio. Mitigation number 2, supplier diversification. We've come from maybe 2-3 decades of giving a bigger part of your sourcing to maybe a limited number of suppliers. Of course, now we all have understood that also entails some risks, and so that has led to many companies. 87% of companies have actually indicated that they assessed their supplier base because of certain the uncertainties and the risks implied in only having a few suppliers for critical products. So revisiting that, supplier diversification has been identified as a key mitigation. Mitigation 3, reshoring, right? The longer a supply chain is, the more sensitive it becomes to disruptions. And 20% of companies have identified that they are actually reshoring some of their manufacturing, bringing them actually closer to the end market, to the end consumer. As such, hopefully, cutting away some of the risk. 20% indicated that they are actually doing that, they have already done that, and even more are looking into it. So it's a serious trend that we see. 4th mitigation, information technology, IT and insights into what is happening, maybe with my supplier or the supplier of my supplier. If I have access to that type of information, of course, that gives you an advance in terms of being prepared for when something does go wrong. And so 85% indicated that they are building those reports, that they are actually investing in those control towers to keep better control over their logistics. Okay, to summarize, you see the key disruptors here, the 4 top disruptors that have been identified, and some of the mitigating actions. Now, there's a lot that you can think of. I will not go through them one by one again. But in our understanding, what you can best do, and that's what then my colleagues Bob and Wouter will walk you through, is look at things in an integral way and not just do quick fixes here or spot actions there. The best thing to do is to first get an overall understanding and then go for an integral supply chain resilience approach. And that is what we will walk you through in the next minutes. Bob, take it away. Bob, you're muted, I think. Maybe unmute again.
Hello?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry, everybody. There was a technical issue. As Joël explained a minute ago, Wouter and myself will take you to the 4th portion of our presentation. And we will provide you some details on the integral resilience approach more has developed to answer to provide an answer to those disruptions we see every day in our supply chains. So this is the approach we foresee. It's a 4-step approach that we split into 2 main blocks. The first block is about assessing. The first step is about assessing the supply chain performance, looking for gaps and weaknesses in your current way of working. Afterwards, these gaps are translated into a development roadmap. So those first 2 are first main block, then the third and the fourth step are second main block. Once you have identified your main weaknesses and improvement opportunities, you will try to put them into a roadmap, and then we try to execute those projects and actions to make sure that our supply chain is more resilient in the future. And afterwards, we also think it's good practice to embed a resilience approach in your supply chain strategy, and for sure the necessary engagement from all through your organization is important to accomplish that. Let's zoom into more detail on those 4 steps. The first step is about the assessment of your supply chain and your supply chain resilience. For this, we base ourselves on the knowledge that ISM is bringing to the table. So they created a framework that's consistent of 13 capabilities on an operational level, and also 13 capabilities on a strategic level. These capabilities are then grouped in subclasses or level 1 capabilities. So if we look at the overview we see over here, for instance, supply chain risk management maturity, end-to-end transparency, supply chain risk management talent, liquidity ratio, leverage ratio, are level 2 capabilities that are combined into the level 1 capability, position and prepare. The same is true for the other capabilities we see over here on the screen. I'm not going into detail in the next few slides, but what is in here, and we will share the deck with you afterwards, but what is in here are for each of those level 2 capabilities, some best practices are provided. So that will also part of the output report. You can see to improve those capabilities, we see that best-in-class organizations are having these specific capabilities present in their way of working and dealing with supply chain resilience. So yet again, I won't go over them into detail one by one, but these will be part of the extract you will be getting afterwards when you fill in the survey after the webinar. And again, this overview is provided for each of the capabilities, or for most of the capabilities that are part of the framework. So these are the ones on the operational level. Now let's take a closer look at a typical output report of such a resilience survey. The survey is shared with your organization. You get a couple of days to fill in the survey. Of course, the more people that take part of the survey, the better, of course. So we have a more broader view of your organization and how resilience plays in your supply chain organization. Part of the report is a score you will get on the overall capability of overall operational capability. In here, it's scored 58 out of 100. Also, always a benchmark is provided to make sure you can compare yourself against a cross-industry pool of other firms or organizations. Next to the overall score on the operational capability, also a score will be provided on the level 1 capabilities of the operational part of the framework. In here you see position and prepare gets a score, sense and plan, and also mitigate and respond. And in this case, in this example report, we see that the organization is scoring poorly on the mitigate and respond portion. Next to those overall scores, also the 3 capabilities, level 2 capabilities, where you scored the best in, are part of the output report. In this case, the organization is scoring good on risk maturity, risk planning, and safety and security. Maybe even more important, and more useful for a firm, part of the report would also be the 3 capabilities, level 2 capabilities, where you scored the weakest, so that that are ranked lowest in your overall overview of capabilities with our scores. And always, as I said before, it's the benchmark is also present to make it able that you compare yourself against a cross-industry pool of other organization. In this case, end-to-end transparency is the capability on an operational level that is the weakest for the example organization. Let's come back to the overall overview of the report. We focused now primarily on the operational capability. Now let's zoom in into the strategic capabilities. Same applies over here. For each level 2 capability, some best practices are provided. So you can always see what a typical good performer on this aspect is doing or is maintaining in his business. For instance, for leadership over here, we see that a clear support from your leadership team needs to be there to be successful when it comes to having an efficient resiliency approach. Again, an overview is provided for all of these level 2 capabilities, but I won't go through them one by one. These will be part of the handover you will get afterwards. What we saw earlier on the operational level also will be there on the strategic level. So you will get an overall score on the strategic level and an individual score on all the level 1 capabilities that are part of the framework. Lead, build, and transform. And in this case, transform is scored the lowest for the organization. Again, similar to what we see on the operational level, also on the strategic level, the 3 level 2 capabilities where you scored the highest will also be part of your output report. We see that in this example case, the partner organization scored very good on their customer relationships. Also, similar to what we see on the operational level, is the fact that you will receive the 3 level 2 capabilities where you scored the weakest. In this case, the organization is scoring very weak on supplier relationships and circularity. To end this first step of our approach, again, the general overview, where we see all the capabilities and the dots are indicating how you scored on the overall level and on the level 1 capabilities. To summarize what will be part of your output report, you will get a score, the overall score on the operational level and on the strategic level, a score on each of the level 1 capabilities, and then for each, on the operational level, you will get the 3 capabilities where you scored the best, and also the 3 capabilities where you scored the weakest. Similar will be there for the strategic level as well. Going back to our approach, we now assessed the supply chain. We identified on an operational level, on a strategic level, the capabilities that are already in your organization we are scoring good on, and also maybe more importantly, those operations or those capabilities where you scored not so good. So those capabilities can give room for improvement. We will need to translate those weaknesses or gaps into real actions and projects, and then we tend to use an impact effort analysis to map those based on the impact for your organization, the effort it takes to accomplish these projects and actions, and also the cost that is involved to get this capability into your organization. These factors combined will give you the necessary tools to plot them on a comprehensive resilience improvement roadmap, giving you actions and the projects that you can take in the near and further on future to make sure your organization becomes more resilient than it was before. Thank you all for listening. This was my part. I will now hand over the word to Wouter.
Thank you, Bob. As mentioned by Bob earlier, Step 3 is the start of the second part, or large block, so to say, of our integral supply chain resilience approach. After identifying the gaps and weaknesses in step 1 and creating an improvement roadmap in step 2, the next step will be to gradually implement the identified actions or projects via dedicated tracks by using cross-functional teams, and all, of course, with the end state in mind. Important to mention here is that the dampen and recovery times we mentioned earlier will be continuously measured in order to keep track of the impact on the supply chain resilience. To facilitate this all, More has developed a resilience improvement toolkit. In the next couple of slides, we will demonstrate the use of this cool toolkit with some concrete examples. So if we come back to the report presented earlier, remember that we identified 3 weaknesses on the operational level and 3 weaknesses on the strategic level. For the demonstration, we will now have a close look at 4 of them. We selected at random from our toolkit. 2 relate to the operational capabilities, being the end-to-end transparency and the visibility of the information flow, and 2 relate to strategic capabilities, being circularity and the strategic supply chain risk mitigation. So the first tool I would like to discuss is our supply chain network value at risk map. This tool can be used to increase your organization's end-to-end transparency. By mapping the entire network, so not only your tier 1 suppliers, but also your tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers, taking into account the sourcing flows, the lead time and lead time variances, and visualizing buffer locations, including the amounts in stock, we are able to identify those parts of the supply chain that pose risks and what the possible monetary and financial risk will be for your organization. Subsequently, it's possible to formulate a plan with suitable actions to either reduce or eliminate those risks. Another operational capability that scored poorly in the report was the visibility of information flow. A supply chain control tower is the ideal solution to improve this capability. The goal of a supply chain control tower, as you can see on the left of the slide, is to implement data integrations in order to create a central end-to-end overview of materials in transit, your inventory at hand, the demand, and so on. This holistic overview then allows your organization to improve your collaborations, streamline your demand and supply, and make better decisions in a timely and well-informed manner. And this overall improves, of course, your supply chain resiliency. At More, our business and analytics team, Element 61, offers technical expertise in setting up these kinds of solutions, for instance, with Microsoft Azure, to mention a popular example. The next slide, circularity, we indicated on the framework as a third weakness that came out of the supply chain resilience assessment debrief. As you all know, consumers and governmental regulators are nowadays requiring companies to pay more and more attention to their ecological footprint. To ensure your organization is future-proof, the full product lifecycle, which you can see on the right of the slide, including recycle and upcycling, needs to be taken into account. It's also important that you really, in order to enable the circularity, you really have to take this concept already into account during the research and design phase and when designing the product. Otherwise, in the end, you won't be able to enable it. One of the big advantages of circularity is that, of course, your organization also becomes less and less dependent on others. Say, for instance, by recycling and reusing parts of your products, you are effectively becoming less dependent on suppliers of these raw materials. And that in turn also increases your resiliency. Then the last capability I would like to discuss is the supply chain risk management. So from our toolbox here at More, we also developed a tool, the failure mode and effect analysis, which, as you all will probably know, originated in the lean philosophy to develop your organization's strategic risk mitigation capability. So the approach is to identify potential risk, give them a score between 1 and 10 on severity, occurrence, and probability, and detectability, in order to calculate the risk priority number and circularity. Subsequently, with those priority indicators in mind, we can develop an action plan to either mitigate or eliminate those associated risks. So after these concrete examples of the tools in our toolbox, we now arrive back at our overview, the fourth step of our integral supply chain resilience approach. So as is clearly shown in the recent years, disruptions are becoming increasingly common. Just think about the examples Joel mentioned earlier. We had the Brexit, COVID-19 stop and go, now the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and so on. So resiliency should really be embedded in the overall supply chain strategy of a company and should really become an integral part of it, not just a one-off. To achieve this outcome, of course, it's important that lasting stakeholder engagement throughout the organizations, as well as setting up the necessary KPIs to monitor your resilience performance. As shown by the image here at More, we also have experience in setting up these kinds of dashboards, for instance, in Power BI. With that, I would like to conclude our presentation about the framework. First of all, I would like to thank you for listening. And I still see that we have some couple minutes, a minute or 7, 8 left for some Q&As. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them now. And I will also give the floor back to Joel.
Hello, thank you, Wouter. Yeah, thank you for walking us through that. As said, an integral approach is what it takes, and so I hope that with what we've shown, we've been able to demonstrate a little bit what some of those components and elements could be. A tool, an approach that we have developed together with ASCM, again, at the Association for Supply Chain Management. And we were happy to demonstrate a few of the tools that was Wouter at the end, who walked us through some of the tools. There's a lot more. Looking at a few questions, there was one question coming in. I'll just open up the question, the Q&A box. It was Katrien who said, have I understood correctly, that logistic imbalances are indicated by respondents as a possible cause, but on the other hand, reshoring is a solution to become more resilient? Well, what we meant there is that reshoring manufacturing could indeed be a possible reaction to address some of those imbalances or uncertainties in logistics network. We've all seen the transportation costs come up. We have all seen that they also went down, but there were some companies who addressed that by actually making the difficult calls to do manufacturing in on other locations. Think about just the capacity at hand in terms of logistics that may become a challenge in some areas. Could also lead to moving to another place. That's pretty much what the response was to that question that we got into the survey. So we have time for a few more questions. Maybe we can look at some people in the audience. If you have a question, please feel free to let me know. Or otherwise, we can maybe address a few topics ourselves. Maybe Bob, if you can go to the next one. Do you have to go through the entirety of the 4-step approach? Meaning, do you have to go end to end through those 4 steps that were demonstrated by Bob and Wouter? Well, the answer is no. You can first do the assessment and let that sink in, of course. You could indeed take the strategy of doing a few quick fixes and not going for the integral approach, but the best way to do it is to really look at things holistically, including embedding a resilience component into your supply chain governance and management. We have another question. Finding and developing talent is also a challenge, and if you don't find or you don't develop the talent, that could also become a risk to your base operations. Is this taken into account? Here the answer is yes, as part of the methodology that you saw, as part of the framework that Bob demonstrated. You might have noticed that there is also a box on talent and on developing innovation and keeping up with best practices into your organization. One concrete example there could be indeed the APIX trainings programs. We all or some of you might have gone through some others might have heard of it, but those are some of the training programs that can help you develop indeed the required skills to keep things under control. Okay, any questions remaining? Okay, how long does it take to implement the resilience approach? You know, the first step, as Bob mentioned, is the assessment that can go quick, of course, depending on the availability of your key stakeholders and on the availability of data. So that first step can really go fast. If we listen into our colleagues at ASCM, can be done in 10 days, best case. Of course, the implementation itself, that depends on how far do you want to go, where do you draw the line, where do you raise the bar, and that of course drives how much time it will take to actually implement and embed that whole resilience philosophy into your supply chain strategy. So, you know, steps 2, 3, and 4 really depend on how far you want to go. The first step, the assessment, that can go fairly quickly as an answer. Okay. That pretty much brings us to the end of this webinar. I hope you all enjoyed it. And if you want to get in touch with us, you'll find us at LinkedIn or on LinkedIn. Thank you for having joined us today, and look forward to meeting you on some next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.